I didn't say anything. Not one word. I just stood there in my mother's kitchen, holding a casserole dish with both hands, and let her words settle over the room like snow. My name is Claire Beaumont, and for most of my life, I was the daughter nobody thought to mention. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that anyone would have noticed from the outside. There were no bruises, no locked doors, no obvious cruelty. There was just a gap, a quiet, persistent gap between me and the rest of my family, like a window left open in January. You don't see it. You just slowly feel the cold. I'm 31 now. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Vancouver, and I own a small catering business that, as of last spring, serves 3 corporate clients, 2 wedding venues, and a weekly meal prep service for busy families across the Lower Mainland. I built it from nothing. From a second-hand commercial mixer, a rented kitchen space in Burnaby, and more rejected emails than I care to count. But none of that existed yet the Christmas my mother introduced me to her book club friends as the one who cooks, not the chef, not the entrepreneur, not even by my name. The one who cooks. My older sister, Danielle, was introduced as my daughter, the occupational therapist. My mother said it the way people announce lottery wins. Danielle had graduated from UBC 4 years earlier, had a steady caseload at a clinic in North Vancouver, owned a condo in Kitsilano. She was everything my mother had pointed at, since we were children, proof that she had done something right. E was the asterisk. Growing up in Langley, there were 2 tracks in our house. Danielle's track had signposts, honor roll certificates on the fridge, piano recitals my parents drove 90 minutes to attend, and university application packages spread across the kitchen table like a sacred ritual. My track had no signposts. It had suggestions, usually framed as concerns. You need something stable, Claire. Something with benefits. Something real. Cooking was not real. Not to my mother. I discovered food when I was 11, the summer my grandmother, my father's mother, who everyone called Nan, came to stay with us for 6 weeks while she recovered from hip surgery. Nan was from New Brunswick originally, and she cooked the way some people pray slowly, with full attention, like the act itself mattered. She taught me how to make tourtière from scratch, how to tell when bread dough had been kneaded enough just by the way it felt in your palms, how a good stock needed time, not shortcuts. Those 6 weeks changed something in me that has never changed back. My mother tolerated my interest in cooking the way you tolerate a child's obsession with something you expect them to outgrow. When I told her in grade 11 that I wanted to apply to culinary school, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with the expression she reserved for serious conversations and said, "That's not a plan, Claire, that's a hobby." I applied anyway. I got in. I went to BCIT and came out 2 years later with a diploma, an enormous amount of debt, and a clarity about what I wanted that I'd never had before. What I did not have was my mother's approval. I spent the first 3 years after graduation working in restaurant kitchens, the kind of work that is brutal and underpaid and absolutely nothing like what you see on television. 12-hour shifts. Weekends and holidays gone. A social life that existed, mostly in theory. I worked at a French bistro in Gastown, then a catering company in Richmond, then briefly a hotel kitchen downtown that smelled permanently of industrial cleaner and ambition. My mother called these years the cooking phase, as if I were still 11 and this were still something I'd eventually set down. Meanwhile, Danielle got promoted. Danielle bought her condo. Danielle got engaged to a structural engineer named Marcus, who my parents adored on site. Every family dinner became a quiet performance with Danielle at the center and me, somewhere off to the side, refilling water glasses and listening to my mother describe Marcus's firm to relatives who hadn't asked. I don't want to make my mother sound like a villain. She wasn't, entirely. She paid for my education, even if she never stopped questioning it. She called on my birthday. She worried about me in the way she understood worry, as pressure applied consistently in the direction of her own vision for my life. She loved me. I believe that. I just don't think she ever saw me clearly. The clearest she ever looked at me was the Christmas I was 27. Her book club friends, 4 women she'd known since my sister and I were in middle school, had come for the annual holiday gathering she hosted every December. I'd driven up from Vancouver that morning, and I'd offered weeks earlier to handle the food. All of it. I wanted to do something nice. I wanted her to see what I could actually do. I made a full spread: mushroom and brie filo parcels, a slow-roasted prime rib with horseradish cream, honey-glazed carrots with thyme, roasted fingerling potatoes, a winter salad with candied pecans, and a champagne vinaigrette, and a dark chocolate peppermint tart for dessert that I had tested 3 times in my apartment kitchen to get right. One of the women, my mother's friend from her neighborhood association, looked at the table and said, "Ellen, did you cook all of this?" My mother paused for half a second. Then she gestured toward me and said, "Oh, Claire did it. She's the one who cooks." The women smiled at me and moved on. The conversation turned back to Danielle, who was telling them about her and Marcus's upcoming trip to Portugal. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment after, staring at the tart I had tested 3 times. I drove back to Vancouver that evening and sat in my parking lot for 20 minutes before going inside. Not crying, just sitting. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes not from being attacked, but from being overlooked over and over, across years. And I felt it then in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Something shifted in me that night, not into anger, into clarity. I stopped asking for my mother's recognition, the same way you stop looking for your keys in a room you've already searched 3 times. Not bitterly, just practically. I redirected everything I had been spending on hoping she'd see me, and I put it somewhere else. I put it into the business. I had been turning a side idea over for almost a year, a catering company focused specifically on corporate events and intimate private dining. Vancouver's market was competitive but not impossible. I had contacts from my years in restaurant kitchens. I had skills I trusted. What I didn't have was capital. I applied for a small business loan through BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. I was rejected the first time. I revised my business plan, got help from a mentor at a local entrepreneurship center, and applied again. Approved the second time. $42,000, which sounds like a lot until you start itemizing commercial kitchen rental, insurance, equipment, and the permits the city of Vancouver requires before you can legally operate a food business. I named the company Beaumont Kitchen. I registered it in February. By April, I had my first client, a small tech company in Yaletown that needed catering for a quarterly meeting. By September, I had 3 regulars and had catered 2 private dinner parties and a baby shower in West Vancouver for a woman who had found me through Instagram. I didn't tell my family. Not because I wanted to hide it. Because I had learned, slowly and painfully, that sharing things with my mother before they were fully formed only gave her room to apply pressure at the joints. I told my nan, though. She was back in Moncton by then, 82 years old, still sharp, still calling me every Sunday. When I told her about the business, she went quiet for a moment, and then said, "That's your grandmother talking, you know. All those hours in my kitchen, that was me putting something into you." I think about that a lot. The Sunday before Thanksgiving last October, my mother called to remind me about the family dinner. My aunt and uncle were driving up from Abbotsford. My cousin Brooke and her husband were coming. Marcus's parents, who had apparently been folded into our family Thanksgivings now, would be there too. 12 people total. "Are you bringing anything?" my mother asked. "I can bring the whole meal if you want," I said. She paused. "You don't need to do all that." "I want to," I said. "It's what I do." Another pause. "All right. But don't make it too complicated. Aunt Rosemary doesn't like anything too fancy." I said okay. I drove to Langley on Thanksgiving Saturday morning with 2 coolers, 3 boxes of equipment, and a menu I had designed, the way I designed everything for clients deliberately, with care, for the specific people who would be eating it. Roast turkey with a dry brine I'd started Thursday, sourdough stuffing with sage and caramelized onion, mashed potatoes finished with brown butter, roasted squash with maple and chili flakes, green bean almondine, cranberry sauce from scratch, dinner rolls I had made the day before and reheated in my mother's oven. And for dessert, a classic butter tart because Marcus's mother was from Ontario and I had done my research, and an apple crumble with ice cream for everyone else. My mother met me at the door and looked at the coolers and said, "I hope it's not too much." I smiled. It won't be. I spent 2 hours in her kitchen getting everything organized, while the rest of the family arrived in the living room. I could hear my mother introducing Marcus's parents to my aunt and uncle. I could hear Danielle laughing at something Marcus said. I could hear the specific warmth in my mother's voice when she talked about the clinic where Danielle worked, the neighborhood where they were looking at houses, the trip to Portugal that had apparently been wonderful. My cousin Brooke came into the kitchen to get a glass of water and stopped when she saw the spread. "Claire," she said, "this looks unreal." "Thank you," I said. "Did you do all of this yourself?" "It's what I do," I said. Second time I'd said it that week. She went back to the living room and I heard her say something I couldn't make out. And then Marcus came in to investigate and actually leaned over one of the trays with genuine interest, asking me about the brine on the turkey. We talked for almost 10 minutes about technique. He told me his mother had been trying to get her turkey right for years. I gave him 2 pieces of advice, and he took out his phone and wrote them down. That was a good moment. We sat down to eat at 2 o'clock. 12 people around my mother's extended dining table, the one she brought out only for occasions. My father, who had said almost nothing to me all morning but had eaten 3 of my dinner rolls before they were supposed to be served, sat at the head of the table. My mother stood to say a few words. She did this every year, a small speech of gratitude that had become a tradition. She talked about the year, about family, about Marcus and Danielle's new house in North Vancouver. They had apparently made an offer that week, which I was hearing for the first time at the dinner table. She talked about Marcus's parents making the trip from Toronto. She mentioned my cousin Brooke's recent promotion at her firm. She thanked everyone for coming. Then she gestured at the food and said, "And of course we have Claire to thank for all of this. She loves to cook. It's her little thing." Her little thing. 12 people looked at the food and nodded pleasantly. I watched Marcus's mother take a bite of the butter tart I had made specifically because I had looked up what she might enjoy, and I sat very still. I have thought a lot about what I said next. I have thought about whether I should have said it. I have thought about whether there was a kinder way, a cleaner way, a way that caused less of what followed. I have gone back and forth, and every time I go back and forth, I come back to the same answer. I said what was true. I said it calmly. I didn't perform it. I didn't plan it. Exactly, it came from a place that had been filling up for a long time, and finally, quietly, overflowed. My mother sat down. There was a moment where people picked up forks, and the meal was about to simply begin. And I said, "Actually, cooking isn't my hobby anymore. Beaumont Kitchen billed just under $200,000 in revenue this year." The table went quiet. Not theatrical quiet, real quiet. The kind where someone starts to reach for something and then doesn't. My father looked at me. Marcus looked at me. My aunt looked at my mother. My mother looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not anger. Something closer to recalibration. "I registered the business 18 months ago," I continued, and my voice was steady, which surprised me. "I have 6 ongoing corporate clients now in Vancouver and Burnaby. A contract with a wedding venue in Whistler starting next spring, and I just signed a partnership with a meal prep company that will put Beaumont Kitchen in front of about 400 households a month." I was not bragging. I want to be clear about that. I was stating facts because facts were the only thing that had ever been allowed at that table, and they had only ever been Danielle's facts, and I had facts too. I had always had them. I had just been the only one keeping track. Marcus was the first to speak. He said, "That's incredible, Claire. Seriously." His mother said, "Is that why the butter tart is this good? Because you actually know what you're doing?" There was a small, released laugh around the table. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed. Quality became something a little softer. My father said, quietly, "I didn't know it had gotten that big." "I know," I said. My mother said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You never told us." "No," I agreed. "I didn't." She absorbed that. I watched her absorb it. I watched her understand, in whatever way she was capable of understanding it, what the not telling meant, what it said about the space she had built or failed to build. She has never been a woman who sits easily with being wrong, my mother. But she sat with it that afternoon, at least for a moment, and that was more than I had expected. Danielle, across the table, had been very quiet. She congratulated me, Eventually, a sincere enough sentence that landed slightly flat, the way compliments do when they're costing the giver something. I don't blame her for that. She had spent a lifetime being the one everyone watched. Learning to share the room was going to take her longer than one Thanksgiving. The dinner continued. The food was good. People had seconds. Marcus's mother asked me for the butter tart recipe, and I told her I'd send it, and I did, the following week, along with a note that said it was my Nan's base recipe, and that she was welcome to it. The conversation moved around the table the way it always does at family gatherings in circles, looping back, people half listening while waiting for their own turn to speak. But something had shifted. I noticed my aunt asking me questions I hadn't been asked before. About the clients. About the Whistler contract. About whether I ever did private home dinners. Because she was thinking about her and my uncle's anniversary in the spring. I told her I did. I gave her my card. After dinner, when I was packing up my equipment in the kitchen, my father came in alone. He stood in the doorway for a moment the way he does when he has something to say and isn't sure how to begin. He is a quiet man, my father. He has spent most of his marriage occupying the space my mother didn't fill, which left very little room for anything else. He said, "The food was really good today, Claire." I said, "Thank you." He said, "I mean it. I've been eating your cooking for years. And I don't think I ever said that enough." I stopped packing for a second. I didn't say anything because I didn't need to. I just looked at him and nodded, and that was sufficient. On the drive back to Vancouver that evening, I passed the exit for the Fraser Valley and thought about Nan, and that summer, when I was 11, and the tourtière that had taken us all afternoon. I thought about how she had said the business sounded like her, passed through me. I had called her that night, after I got home, and she had listened to the whole story without interrupting, and then said, "Good girl, they'll catch up eventually." I'm not waiting for them to catch up. That's the thing I want you to understand, if you've watched this far, if something here has felt familiar to you. I spent years waiting for my mother to change her language, waiting for my father to push back, waiting for some moment of recognition that would finally make me feel like I existed in the right way in that family. I don't wait anymore. I build. There is a difference between forgiving people and continuing to seek their approval. I have forgiven my mother for the way she saw me, or failed to. I understand it now more than I used to. She grew up in a household where stability meant a government job and benefits and a pension, and creativity was something you did on evenings and weekends if you were lucky. Her fear for me was real. It was just shaped around the wrong things. But I don't need her to validate what I've built. The clients do that. The food does that. Nan does that. Every Sunday, on the phone. Beaumont Kitchen is real. It exists. $200,000 in revenue in its first full year is real, and next year will be more. And the year after that will be more again. I am building something that is entirely mine. Something I made with the exact skills my mother spent years worrying were impractical. The one who cooks. Her little thing. I think about that sentence sometimes. I think about what my mother meant by it and what she didn't mean. I think she meant it as diminishment, but I have decided, without her permission, to take it as description, because cooking is what I do. It is the thing I am most fully myself inside of. It is the language I learned from my grandmother in a kitchen in Langley 20 years ago, and I have spent the years since learning to say more and more inside of it. If you are sitting somewhere, right now, feeling invisible inside your own family, being the one whose path doesn't have signposts, whose achievements don't get announced before dinner, I want you to hear this. The work is real whether or not anyone in that room can see it. Your Thanksgiving table does not determine your worth. Neither does your mother's vocabulary for who you are. Keep building. Let the food speak. Let the numbers speak. Let the work speak. And in the meantime, make something so good that even the people who underestimated you can't help but ask for seconds. They will. Trust me on that. They always do.